Greetings and welcome to the Quantum Ogre Cast, the topical TTRPG podcast you were destined to encounter, no matter what choices you made. I am your elder goblin host, Jorvin, and I'm joined today by a sensible ogre guest, Frank from What is Tabletop. How's it going, Frank?
I'm very confused. I was just walking to my friend Charles's house to record our next episode, and I took a wrong turn, and now I'm somehow trapped in this podcast dungeon. And anytime I try to escape, it just puts me back in this room.
Well, then you are in the right place because that is the Quantum Ogre Quandary, my friend. So yeah, just talk a little bit about your channel. You guys just hit 1 year, right?
Yeah, it's been 1 year. We were like, if we could hit 1,000 subs eventually, we'd be happy. And we did that like in December. We're almost at 1,500 now, and yeah, like we're doing really good. We're celebrating our 1 year with like a very cool one shot in Avatar Legends, which people got to vote on, and some people might be a little upset because they wanted Deadlands, but that's not how voting works.
Well, dude, that's awesome. Yeah, even 1,000 is nothing to, what am I trying to say? It's nothing small. Like there are lots of channels that never even really hit that. So congrats. That's awesome.
Thanks.
And if you're listening out there and you haven't subscribed to What is Tabletop, go check it out. You and Charles have awesome conversations.
Yeah.
They're centered around the hobby. They're very similar to what I'm doing here. And you guys have great rapport and are hilarious, and I enjoy all of them.
Oh, I mean, we're definitely hilarious, and we try to figure out who's the funny one. That's like the thing we ask everybody. I'll be nice and not ask you, but we've definitely put certain people in very awkward situations to be like, no, which one of us funnier?
My answer will always be the one with the more dad jokes because that's where I'm at in life. So,
All right, Charles has one.
sorry.
Fine.
All right. Sorry. It's good form to like invite your guest on and immediately disparage them, I hear. So
Yeah, that's cool.
what
That's
I do
cool.
here.
He needs the morale boost anyway. It's fine.
Speaking of disparaging guests, are you ready for your real life rapid fire character sheet questionnaire?
I was born ready.
That's a mouthful. I've got to think of a way to shorten that. 'Cause, yeah, I'm going to forget it. All right. So here we go. Don't think too hard about these. Just first thing off the top of your head, your real life alignment.
It's lawful good. I mean, like, it's the boring answer, but it's the right answer. It's lawful good.
I mean, who's to say, Maybe we live in a state of anarchy and you got to buck the system. So,
Yeah.
all right. Non-human ancestry you relate most to.
I mean, I like to sleep and eat. If I could have second breakfast for the rest of my life, it'd be great. So halflings all the way through for sure.
Yeah, legally distinct halflings for the win. Okay. You're in a dungeon. A monster chases you to a room. You see a weapon rack. What are you grabbing?
Glaive. It's got reach, but also looks really cool.
There you go. Is the one with the little flag on it?
Yeah, it does have like a little little decorative piece, and then it also has like almost like a spear like end to it. So, if you're terrible at the glaive, you can just poke people.
I think that's taking me back to my Soul Calibur days. I was a Keelik player.
I definitely know what that
if
is.
anyone gets that.
Yep,
Okay.
definitely, yeah.
Okay, don't be humble. Your highest attribute.
Oh, wisdom, 100%.
Wisdom. All right. I think you're the first one to say that on the podcast.
Yeah, I should be humble and say it's not that,
Actually, maybe Ryan said that because he said he was patient, but yeah. Anyway, dump stat.
It's dexterity. I drop things way too much at my job. Not good at that at all.
Fair enough. You and my wife dropping pens all day.
Yep, pens, yes.
Okay.
That's what I'll drop.
Not plates or anything else important.
Not people's food.
Okay,
Nope.
here's an interesting one. You arrive at the potion shop. There are no healing potions. What kind of potion are you taking with you?
Oh my gosh, that's tough. I mean, like, potion of invisibility comes to mind immediately, but there's got to be cooler potions, right? Potion of invulnerability, maybe. But then what would I use that for in real life? Oh my gosh. X-ray, true sight. There we go. I don't know. That one might also be terrible.
The problem with a potion of invulnerability is you have to know when you're about to be stabbed or shot or something, right?
That's a fair point. Okay,
Yeah.
fine poison.
You gotta have some prior planning.
Just get some poison and get that ready for something.
Awesome. Well, that's your real life character sheet questionnaire. Thank you for participating in our mini game. And so without further ado, we will get into today's meandering topic, and then eventually we'll find our way to the real topic. All right. Well, I like to always start off with a more casual conversation. I think last time we did discuss a bit of like what kind of games have you been jamming on, stuff like
Hmm.
that?
So here
So
here's
yeah,
here's the funny thing. I've been trying to get my group to play different kinds of RPGs so I can have a good repertoire for the channel, be able to say, here's a bunch of different games, here's different cool unique ideas they all have. And then we like finished a mini campaign and they sat me down and they're like, Frank, we want to play Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm like, okay. It's weird. This feels
like
like a weird.
2024.
No, this was like, yeah, the new one. Well, I told them I want to play the new one because I want to see like, are the changes better? Because I think some of them are, but
Yeah,
if we're doing this, we're going all the way. And then of course, classically, I have a player who's like, "Can I be the astral form monk? I know that's not the new." And I'm like, you know what? Fine. They say it's backwards compatible. Let's try it out.
yeah. How did that go?
I mean, so far it's going well. We haven't run into anything weird yet. I am doing some weird
Okay,
homebrew shenanigans with the new rules to see if it's more in line with like my preferences from playing other games.
gotcha. What was the game that you were hoping to get everybody into before they all asked for D&D?
Oh, that's a great question. So honestly, I've just been happy to play anything. We played Star Wars for a little bit. That
Yeah,
was fun. We did a very short-term Candela Obscura one. That was, I'll say enlightening is the best way to say it. Um, We did what did we just come out of? We were coming out of Traveler. That one was fun. And I think everyone
oh,
everyone agreed that the character creation was the best part because it is.
uh, yeah. That's kind of what I've heard. It's like everyone's big thing is like you can die in character creation, and then I'm like,
Mhm.
yeah, but what happens after that? Is it fun still?
Yeah. I wanted to play like a superhero RPG really bad. We have Sentinel Comics, that one looks fun. Masks if we were going to do more of a like teenage focused one. Indominate because we're good friends with the creators there, and that might have been interesting too. Um,
Oh yeah.
Deadlands would have been fun to play. Uh, and honestly, we did like a few one shots of the Avatar TTRPG in preparation for our one shot coming out, just so we could get a good idea of what was going on. And that was honestly a really fun system. Like I actually really enjoy it for it being as rules light
Yeah.
as it is.
Yeah, I've heard nothing but good things about Avatar. The
Mhm.
the thing I always hear people say though is like, is there going to be continued support for it? Which is a valid question. But
Yeah.
maybe you can answer that. I have no idea.
I mean, I guess the only thing you could do with a game like Avatar, since it's powered by the apocalypse, is add in new playbooks because, like, that's really how you
Mm,
expand the game. I mean, I guess they do have like abilities that are like specific bender moves that you could do, and that allows you to do like some cool stuff. So, like, you could lava bend or lightning bend or combustion bend or do all of these really interesting things. But again, they keep it rules light, so it's not like, all right, you can move a piece of rock that is 1 cubic meter by 1 cubic meter by 1 cubic meter. And
right.
if it is not exactly that proportion, then it falls apart immediately, right? Those kind of games, it doesn't do that. Um, but I could see what some people think of like, how are you going to keep it going? I think the easiest way to keep it going is if the rumors of a new Avatar series are true. You just do a source book for
Mm,
that. And I'm sure they'll introduce some new
yeah.
wacky bending or something in that.
Yeah, there's always like a secret metal bending or some new power, right?
Right. Yes, I can mind bend. That'll be the new thing.
Well, to go back to something you said earlier, I got to play one of my first superhero RPGs really recently.
Hmm.
I played the Sentinel Comics RPG,
Oh, it's so fun.
and yeah, I found it really fascinating actually because the confines aren't really like what can you do with your powers, but like how do you make just having almost limitless powers interesting, right?
Right. Yeah, I
Which
what I
plus
I
the
sorry, go ahead.
oh, yeah, I was just gonna say that the like sort of wounds system was really fascinating to me too,
Hmm.
where the more wounds you take on, the more your like
Yes.
powers kind of emerge, which was really cool.
Yeah, that's a really cool system where you can say, are you going to be more like a character who's like really strong at the beginning, but as the battle goes on, becomes weaker and weaker? Or are you going to be more like Superman? Is their example of a character who gets stronger as the battle goes on because they realize they can't be holding back anymore? Like that's just one example of it. Or like I guess Hulk
Hmm.
is another example of it too, of like a character who gets stronger as the fight goes on. And so that's a really cool system. I'm a huge fan of their major and minor twists. where
Yeah.
you can have a failed roll and then choose to take on a twist that you yourself chose for your character, and then you implement it into the story in order to succeed. And it could be something as simple as like, how did your recklessness cause some harm to one of your fellow supers? And it's like, oh, okay, well, clearly I was going too far and I threw a truck and like the guy dodged out of the way, but then it hit my buddy.
Yeah, no, I thought that system was really cool. In fact, I had a sort of Magneto style character, basically a Magneto ripoff, and one of my minor twists was that something would be made of a metal that I couldn't bend, or like an alloy I couldn't,
Yeah.
manipulate or touch or anything like that. And it was just really cool to see like how that would sort of manifest whenever the DM or the GM would have like one of those moments where I'd be like, yeah, here, I'll hand over the reins to you, and you decide in what way this goes wrong. I don't know, I
Yeah.
really love those sort of mechanics where you hand over a bit of the flavor on either side of the fence, really.
Mm-hmm. I mean, again, I like it too because it's even if you have like a jokingly adversarial relationship with your players, like I do, where it's like we know we're here to tell a story and we're collaborating, but it's also a little fun to have it be like Frank's being a little mean to us, and so to be able to say like this thing happens, they're like that's not fair. I'm like no 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 no, you wrote the twist, sir. I'm just saying what happens is fun
Yeah,
from
exactly.
my perspective.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think this is a natural enough segue that we could go into today's topic where we're talking about, some of the benefits of trying different systems. We're
Yeah.
already talking, dancing around it here, talking about superhero systems, and, we've talked before about like Blades in the Dark and stuff. But yeah, I'll just pitch it to you and say, what are some benefits that you have seen as a game master from trying out different systems?
I mean, honestly, it's just good to know like how other systems do it because it frees your mind a little bit, ironically, to be able to do it in the system you're comfortable with. So like if your primary system is Dungeons and Dragons and you have a hard time coming up with like things off the cuff, playing a system like we just talked about with Sentinels, where you have a little bit of like training wheels, where it's like you don't have to think of something off the cuff. You just have to think, how does this minor twist or major twist fit into it? That's like a really easy way to then springboard and start improving a little bit more and being like, okay, I can think of natural ways. Like maybe I use the flaws in my character, and that's how like this Nat 1 is affected in their diplomacy talk to the king. It's like, well, you have a flaw that says you're arrogant. So maybe the king says something like I will grant your request if you swear your loyalty to me and choose to walk only for me, and then you get angry about it. That could be like a very interesting way to do it. I would have never thought of initiative, like systems that don't do any initiativeless
Mm,
systems. I would have thought that was a terrible idea like 5 years ago. Like, what are you
yeah.
talking about? You need structure in order for players to not be crazy. And having played a few of those free flow initiative systems, it's actually made it running combat a little bit more smooth. Because I can now be like, man, it's taking too long to get to this other guy's turn. I gotta speed things up real quick and just, maybe yada yada a little bit of the villain's turn. Like, be like, okay, they're gonna attack you here and here, and this is how the combat flows. And I found that
Right.
like my players are more engaged with combat now because I've done no initiative systems in the past.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and on top of that, I really like games that let you sort of inject something into the middle of like a scene or combat or whatever it
Mhm.
is, whether that's like a meta currency or I think it's
Yeah.
in what's the Critical Role game? I've lost
A
it right
Candle
now.
Obscura or Daggerheart.
Daggerheart. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, where Daggerheart, you actually I haven't actually played it, so this is just what I've heard in
Mhm.
other people's reviews and things. But you can either like spend a point to make an action, or if someone rolls with opposite of hope, I think it's what is it?
Fear.
Hope and fear, I think is
Yeah.
what it is. So yeah, if a fear roll happens, then one of the characters on the GM side of the screen can then make an action. Just stuff like that, where it's like even something as simple as having a different kind of initiative system can really spark something interesting and make you sort of think outside of the confines of the game that you're currently playing.
Yeah, I love currency systems like that. Our friend Peter at Tales from Elsewhere in the game he's designing, he has like a luck based system, which is somewhat similar, where you can spend luck to like make a miss into a hit and like have good outcomes for you. But in order to even get the luck, you need to have one of your flaws come into play in a scene. So you have to have bad luck happen to you in order for good luck to happen to you in the future. I think that's a really cool way to do that. And it's also something that, like, if you think about it, you could steal and use in like a few other games, right? That's my
Right.
favorite method
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah. And, to that point, that's one of the things I quickly started to pick up on whenever, I branched outside of Pathfinder and D&D,
Mm-hmm.
was that there were, so many different systems out there trying things different ways. They really, you don't even necessarily have to just play a new game to really get a grasp on these fresh ideas. You can just kind of mine it and bring it back to your own game if that's what you prefer. Or, one of the things, here's a good example. Like, I got really stuck in the 5e mindset of like combat is tension, right?
Yeah.
Like, I was so used to that being the way that you provide tension and like, encounters in a game, that when I switched over to a system like Genesis, for instance,
Mm.
I had to really rewire my brain and go, oh, combats don't really eat up an hour worth of time in this. Like, I have to find different ways to like have that tension at the table and really like drive the story outside of just like there's a bag of hit points standing in your way kind of a thing. And
Yeah.
that system was one of the first ones that really like made me go, I need to play a lot more games.
Yeah, I played the Star Wars Genesis game, Edge or
Yeah,
whatever. They've changed the name on it so many times because it's changed hands so many times. But yeah, I love the fact that it's an encounter. It's not a combat. It's an encounter that you go into. And so, sure, you might
right.
use your like gun skill in order to shoot somebody, but your persuasion skill can also get you out of that situation too. Like, there's no rule saying this is better than this or like you this does that. And it's you just are able to do whatever skill you think works best, and you build your dice pool, and then you roll it, and then you look for the result. And if it's a positive one, the thing happens, and it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, or like I don't know if you've played any index card RPG, but the way that like effort works in that game is it's sort of like giving hearts or HP to like even non-combat encounters, whether that's like sneaking into a mansion or whittling down that person's resolve, that guard, to get out of your way and let you in the gate kind of a thing. There's like ways that you can roll different kinds of skills rather than just sort of hit the HP with a sword. Maybe you're hitting the HP, quote unquote, here with your persuasion check, that
Mhm.
sort of thing. So that game also really unlocked something in my GM brain that went like, okay, here's an alternative way to sort of track, or Blades in the Dark's another good example with the
Mhm.
clocks, right? Like, clocks represent a more nebulous thing that's going to happen, and it's sort of this tug of war back and forth effect where you're like, how quick before our facade runs out and everyone realizes we are crashing the party. We're not actual other nobles here. Um, and
Right.
that clock is such a good tension driver, because usually you're like writing it on a dry erase board and everyone's looking at it and they're going, oh crap, we have one more slice of that pie before we are found out, and everything just hits the fan. So
Yeah, I think another benefit too is you get to find out like what you actually enjoy about RPGs. Because if you enjoy
Mm.
combat and like the tactical like strategy that comes to that part of like D&D, let's say, you are going to probably play something like Lancer and realize, "Oh, this has similar tactics to it, and like my character build's really important and I really enjoy that." And so then you get to play like other games, and then you start to find out like, okay, crunchy rules games is my jam. I like it to where I like my character build matters and how I built my character is important. And you might find like your actual favorite RPG out there. Conversely, you might play a more rules light game and realize, man, I really like that the rules just complement the storytelling. And if I want to do something, I'm empowered to do so because of the rules. Or maybe I am more likely to act as my character because of the rules. And then you start to take that back to D&D and say like, okay, I'm really good at persuasion. Maybe I'm going to always try to persuade people, even if it's a bad idea. Oh, that sounds like an interesting character. Someone who's just fast talking and always trying to get the click thing. And then you can just like expand even your D&D games more than it used to be just because you played a few other RPGs.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and like you say, when you're really honing in on that aspect of gaming that you like, there are actually games too that will you'll realize by playing different systems that the thing you really liked wasn't really present in that system you were
Yeah.
playing. You know, like for instance, if you're really that person who you're just like, I love narrative style games, and no offense to either of these games, but all you've played is like Pathfinder and D&D, well then suddenly you try something like Burning Wheel, right? And you're looking at it and you're going, oh, beliefs, instincts, and traits. This is kind of like what I've always maybe instinctually done, but like having it actually quantified inside the game mechanics is really interesting for me to play with, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever looked at that game at all, but it's got some really cool socially driven mechanics in it.
I mean, here's the thing about every RPG. Like, the further I get into like RPG sets out of D&D, the more I keep finding blind spots. Like,
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah.
yeah, I'm like, okay, if I learn Blades in the Dark, great. I'm gonna like that's the most recent example that everyone likes. And then you have people who are like, you didn't talk about Burning Wheel. It's like, okay, let me look at Burning Wheel. Where's Fabula Ultima? All right, let me look into that one.
Oh no, I'm right there with you. Yeah, I can't make like a top 10
No.
TTRPG list without someone just going, "Wow, you didn't even talk about Traveler." Come on, dude.
Everyone's favorite is not going
Yeah,
to be mentioned in your list of like 100 best TTRPGs. It's like you forgot
yeah.
about the third edition of Werewolf the Apocalypse. How dare you? That's my favorite version.
But to your point, no, that's a really succinct way to put it is like your RPG blind spots, right? Like,
Mhm.
it wasn't until I played Genesis and I played Blades in the Dark specifically that I was like, oh, this is such a cool way to do like chase scenes and, like
Yeah.
sort of intrigue and heists and stuff like that. And really that game was a huge influence for me. It just really turned some light on in my brain, and I was like, "Oh, so I haven't, I could have been doing things this way this whole time, but now that I'm seeing like great examples and how to run these things, it opens up the world for possibilities when you're playing any game at the table."
Yeah. And conversely, I mean, you could play an RPG that you're like, oh, this could be fun. And you play it and you realize, okay, that was not my cup of jam. like I did not enjoy that. My cup of jam is what I was going to say. That's not a phrase.
Hey, cup of jam. Yep, I'm here for it.
So, like, for example,
No, but,
we finished playing D&D. It was like a 3-year long campaign. And Charles and I had just started this channel. And we're like, we're going to play Candela Obscura. It's meant to be more short term. It's meant to only be a few sessions long. And it's a good palate cleanser. And we played it, and our group was like, we don't like this. Not to diss on Candela. I know there's a lot of fans of it, but there was so little rules for us at least.
mm, yeah,
Like it definitely feels more like a improv starter kit
mm,
basically rather than a RPG, at least in our opinion. And so like because there's so little rules, we found like okay, we don't want to play a system where it's like you have 2 rules and that's it. It's like we actually want some
yeah.
structure. We want some abilities. I've learned through that my players are more likely to look at their character sheet to figure out what they're going to do rather than just thinking off the top of their head, I can do anything, so what will I do?
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a great point too, because yeah, like I had some friends that played Cipher System, right?
Hmm.
And it was too customizable for them. That they
Yeah.
like the sort of handrails that classes provide, but when you have a game that's so open ended, there are people that really struggle with like, what is the identity of my character? Without
Hmm.
the sort of tropes being there, I have to build it all from scratch. Like, ooh, I don't know, that might not be for me. I really liked being a rogue or a wizard or
Hmm.
whatever. So
Yeah.
yeah, it can go both ways.
Yeah, I've again having done enough session zeros, I now know like if I give my players so many options that they don't know what to choose from, there'll be a like almost hour-long pause where everyone's reading through all the options and trying to figure it out. And so sometimes we don't have that luxury, especially if it's like, hey guys, we're gonna just do a one shot. We only have an hour to character build. Let's see if we can do it. We had that with a playtest one we did, and I was lucky enough to read through it ahead of time. And so one of the like perks that you could take I knew was like, hey, there's no point in you reading this like entire sheet because you're just going to choose this one. So I'm just going to give it to you.
Yeah.
I know you well enough.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you the monster transformation perk, and you're going to love it, and you're going to be like, yep, 100%. And that's what happened. My player was like, Frank, you know me so well. I'm like, of course I do. Let's save us some time. Transform into a monster. And he's like, great, excellent.
Yeah. Yeah. And, your mileage will vary with all this stuff. But
Absolutely.
like you said, actually, I found my wall sort of with like rules lightness
Hmm.
by playing a specific game that I was just like, yeah, this is too loose for me. Like, I want a little bit more of like limitations almost, right? Like,
Yeah.
I realized through the process of trying a lot of these rules like games that you know what? I actually do like a little bit of the classic trappings. Like, I kind of landed on a more of like a Shadow Dark than like a, I don't know, Easy D6, for example.
Yeah.
Which is a great game. I actually played that at a con, and I was like, wow, this is like the perfect con game, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I wanted something a little more from my rules like games, just so that we knew where things were headed, or there was some sort of a bullseye, even if it was moving, to know we have these confines we're playing the game in, right?
Yeah. I mean, I also love like those games too, right? We played Honey Heist a bunch, and we all agree like it's great for like only two players were able to show up, but we all still want to hang out. Great. We'll bust out Honey Heist. We'll have a hilarious time. The bears will be people and try to steal honey and fail. That's like super fun to us, but like for a long-term campaign, which is something we all really enjoy, you couldn't do that with Honey Heist. Or put it simpler like Dread, which is a very fascinating game, despite having literally one mechanic of pull a Jenga block.
Yeah.
It's super fun, and we've had a few sessions where like everyone was super involved, and they're like, I don't want my character to die. If anything, I want them to be the last one standing. And I'm like, guys, this isn't a contest. You can all die or you can all live. It's not an either or kind of a thing. But like, could we make that into a longer term thing? I don't know. I know like Geek and Sundry did that a while ago. They tried to do
Mm,
like multiple series of Dread, and I've seen some of them. And like, again, it kind of devolved into more just like improv or role play with the occasional mechanic thrown in there. And then they tried to like
right.
add in more mechanics to make it more interesting, and it was like really all it did was like, here's the weird tower. It's slanted. Can you pull from the slanted tower? And so,
Yeah.
mhm,
Yeah, that seems like a weird one to sort of hack.
mhm,
I don't know what you could really ultimately accomplish with that one. But yeah, just to bring it back a little bit here, I think you will learn a lot about yourself and especially your players by trying different systems. Like,
mhm,
for instance, I've been playing a little bit more Shadow Dark lately, which I talk about probably a lot on this podcast. But um, I think what I've found is that my players do enjoy a game where death is very present on the table, even if they don't necessarily like dying, which is a strange
mhm,
sort of concept. But it took playing a deadlier game consistently to realize that, like, yeah, we were playing a lot of 5e for a while, and then we played a lot of Genesis and stuff. But I found that there wasn't as much tension there, and so people got kind of bored of their characters. So
mhm.
that was just something I learned by like, reaching into these more old school style games where characters come and go a lot and death is, or lethality is a little higher, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've definitely trained my players to get over the fact that death can happen because I have so many deaths in so many of my campaigns so much that it's just become like, oh, yep, this is the part of the campaign where one of our characters dies. Thanks, Frank. They're used to that. But what's interesting is I found that character progression is a huge thing they love. They want to know
Mm,
that when they complete a task, they get a reward, and that reward is making their character either stronger or like at least being able to progress them towards some final goal. Even if we don't reach that final goal, they like knowing this is where I'm going to get. So you get games like I'm trying to think off the top of my head of like, yeah, you get like more rules like games, or even honestly the Star Wars Genesis system. Like you do
yeah,
character progression, but it doesn't feel as like impactful to them as leveling up and being like, cool, I get this brand new thing that I can have.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, because that one's like a sort of like buying your skills or getting like a talent
right.
from a tree, sort of a thing.
And
Yeah,
it's yeah, and
oh, go ahead.
it happens whenever you want, which is I think something that I like about the Star Wars system, that you, when you have downtime, spend your XP. Like the GM doesn't tell you now you level up. You get XP and you choose to spend it, which I think is a really cool thing.
Yeah, and that's so different from a lot of the classic
Mhm.
framing of a lot of TTRPGs that maybe, that's where you find out, oh, my players actually, I think I had one guy I can think of in particular who really did not like that.
Yeah.
He really bounced off of the you buy, you sink all your points in, or I think what he didn't like is that a lot of times you had to save them in order to like
Mhm.
get something good later.
Yeah.
And he just wanted it all when he leveled up, sort of a thing. So yeah, he really bounced off of that concept. But you know, it was a learning experience, and there were some things we all really enjoyed about that game. But we ultimately landed on like, I don't think this is quite the game for our group. But I learned a lot through GMing it. I thought it was
Hmm.
really fascinating. It was a fun, very pulpy kind of a game, especially the Star Wars one.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really thought it fit Star Wars so well.
Yeah, I think another benefit of trying different RPGs is that you learn about yourself, not just what you like, but like how you teach things. So I've
Mm,
learned that I will not, as much as I try, know every rule that comes up immediately. But so I've had to get over this fact of like I have to be able to know every rule because I played fifth edition for so long. I know even the minutiae cases where it's like, well, Frank, what happens in this situation? I'm like, the goblin wins. It's like, man, classic, of course, that makes sense. But then you
the
play like
Goblin
a
always
brand new
wins.
game. Yeah. But then you play a brand new game and it's like, Frank, what happens in this situation where the bear and the owl are trying to fight each other in court? And it's like, dang it, I haven't played this game enough to know what happens when the bear and the owl are in court together. And so it's caused me to be able to one like push back and say like it's okay, Frank. You don't need to know every rule the first time you play a brand new game. It's okay. It's fine. Like you will learn the rules as you go along and then you will understand it. Cuz there's some things that I just don't understand until we start playing. And I'm like, "Oh,
Hmm.
I get it now. They phrased it this way because X, Y, or Z."
Yeah, and you also learn quickly like what rules you're willing to shed, or that
Oh yeah.
just what are the quickest things that go away whenever you try a new system out. Like, I mentioned Burning Wheel earlier, and as much as I was enjoying some aspects of that system, it is surprisingly crunchy for like a narrative based game, and the combat it was so granular that at a certain point I was like, no, we're not going to do it this way. We're just going to do like dice versus dice because that's essentially what you're doing. And then like whoever takes the biggest wound kind of loses that scene or
Mhm.
whatever, and then you make another decision at that point. Like, do we keep pressing the combat or do we try to pivot and turn it into like a chase or social? And so, yeah, I quickly just discovered this level of like tit for tat kind of combat just wasn't really interesting to me, or in my opinion, any of the players I was playing with at the time. So we just kind of were like, let's do a simplified combat. We don't need the
Mhm.
like, do you volley with ranged weapons first and then we'll roll shields, and it was like
Yeah.
there were so many phases to a single combat that it was like no one is having fun with this. This is the first thing we're tossing. Everyone's enjoying all the other things about it. Let's get rid of this and then enjoy the game.
Absolutely. One of my favorite mechanics from a game I haven't played yet, is from Panic at the Dojo. Got to make sure I say it correctly. It's Panic at the Dojo. Where
Not that other
it,
band.
nope, not that one. Where your characters get into a fight scene, and before the first punch is thrown, you have to determine the stakes of the fight scene. You say if our characters win, X happens, and then the villains say if the villains win, X happens. And so what's
Mm,
interesting about that is it changes the stakes of the game. So every time you go into combat in D&D, inherently a lot of players are probably thinking if we lose we die. And so
mm,
that's the mindset they're going in. We got to go full out. We got to go Nova because if we lose, we die. But the GM might be like, well, if you lose, it just means the villains get away with the MacGuffin. That's all it means. It doesn't mean you die. It just means you lost. But if that's not established between the two groups, then you're kind of like going over like completely different things, and you're having like just a conflict of what's going on. So panic, because it simply says, you state what the point of your goal is. All right, if we win, we get the villain goes to jail. That's what happens. Cool. And if the villain wins, he escapes. We have now established this. So now I, as the GM, can go a little more full out, be a little bit more harsh, because the stakes aren't your character dies. The stakes are he gets away. And of course, the villain wants to get away. And so, like, I
Yeah.
think that's a really cool one. And so I'm going to implement that, like, in very important battles, being like, hey guys, just so you know, here's the stakes of this battle. If you lose, meaning you go unconscious, all of you, they're not going to kill you. They're just going to run away. Or they're just going to do X, Y, or Z. Or maybe the ritual starts and now you're in the middle of the ritual circle, right? Stating that is something I never would have thought of, except until I saw like this other RPG that was like, oh yeah, of course that makes sense, that should be a rule.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I do like that sort of like expectations or intent kind of a thing. That's something I think I'm gonna say I learned this from Index Card RPG, but maybe not. I don't remember. But similarly, there was a game where I was reading the sort of game master uh, information. And it was like, yeah, like let players know the stakes of a role.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as like, oh, I'm going to make this dexterity check. Well, it's much more impactful if you say, hey, just so you know, if you do fail this check, you plummet to your death. It's an endless chasm. This isn't going to be like oh, you grab onto that root as you're falling and then everyone else makes a check to try to pull you back. It's like, this is save or die, folks. Like, yeah, intent or even, making an assumption about like what the scene is. I do really like that as a combat mechanic too. Like
Yeah.
we're about to enter into this, or rather an encounter. Like what's at stake in this encounter? You might be going, well, the king gets mad if we fail to convince him that, our
Mhm.
quest is important or whatever. But the GM might be going, no, you don't understand. If you mess this up, you are banished from this land. You are outcasts. You're outlaws now. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a really interesting way to like turn an encounter and tune up the intensity of it or the pressure of it rather.
Yeah, and it's funny how playing other games like that, you can start to go back to previous RPGs and see. Now, I'm not going to say the flaws because that's a little mean, but maybe some of the not polished areas, right? Like fifth
The
edition,
gaps.
yeah, the gaps, perfect. So like fifth edition will occasionally have a rule that says you can use this if you fail a check. That and that implies that the character should know if they've succeeded on a check or not. But then there's other rules where it's like, well, no, you want to keep the DC hidden. And so it's like this weird thing of like, do I always tell you what the DC is? Do you just roll to find out? Because I want there to be some tension. And maybe I want you to use resources if you think you're going to get it or not. But then you have this ability that says, I only use this ability if I fail. So what do you do in those situations, right? And so
Hmm.
yeah, like the stuff like that can become a little bit more apparent. Like for example, I started to realize I'm not the biggest fan of big dice, small modifier games,
Mm,
where it's like I roll a d20 and add +5. It's like, wow, okay, so really, statistically speaking, you're just hoping you roll well. It's more about how
right.
well you roll than like how you build your character. I'm personally not the biggest fan of that. I know some people are, but like I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't played other games where like the math was like clearly much more like well thought out with like a dice curve system or a dice pool system.
Yeah, for sure. Because yeah, even like your powered by the apocalypse
Hmm.
style games, you're only rolling a what 2d6 in that? Isn't that what it
Yeah,
is?
usually it's just 2d6.
And and you're trying to get like a 7, and you might have like a little bit of a modifier on certain skills. I think that's how that goes, but
Usually it's a,
7 or above.
yeah, usually
But
it's
it's
an 8 at the very least, because or it's
okay.
a like a gap of like 7 to 10 is a moderate success and a 10 or higher is a total success depending on the system. But again, what's nice about that
Yeah.
is you can look and say like I'm rolling 2d6, the average number I'm going to get is a 7. If in order to succeed I need an 8, if I have a +1 in something, that means I am very likely to succeed in that thing. Like over
Right.
half the time likely to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're kind of talking about swinginess of
Mhm.
dice and like probabilities and stuff like that. But that's something you might not realize if you've only played D20 fantasy games, right? Like the D20 is the swingiest die in that set, right? Like,
Yeah,
and you might have a character where you've built and you're saying like, I am the greatest swordsman in the land, but your dice rolls are saying a different story. Where like every time
right.
you go to swing, I'm missing every time because I just keep rolling low all night. And that's, a very different feel than a game that says like you're rolling 2d6 trying to get 8 or better and you have a +4, like there's very few instances where you're
Right.
not hitting that monster and being that swordsman and portraying that fantasy you're trying to capture. So,
I actually have a
yeah, it's
moment like that. We were playing Pathfinder in college, and my friend played a magus who could crit half the time. Like literally on 11 or higher, they could crit on any attack roll. And he played it for 1.5 sessions because the character couldn't roll above a 10.
oh my
He had a
gosh.
50% chance to
Yep.
crit and couldn't even hit the monsters that they were fighting. And it was terrible, but it was so funny at the same time. And
That is painful though.
yeah, and I don't want people to think like, oh, Frank doesn't like swing. I've come around on swinginess. I think there are moments where it's really cool when you have no choice but to roll a nat 20, and you better hope you do, and then you do, and it's amazing. I think those moments can be really fun, but at the same time, I really like having consistent dice, personally. But
Yeah, or at least like the thing you've built your character to do feels fairly consistent, right?
yeah,
Like even if it's not like, you know, again, I'll use the swordsman trope. I'm a swordsman. Maybe I'm a strength fighter wielding an axe or something like that.
mhm,
But every time I try to use dex and jump over, or whatever, walk a tightrope, my guy just falls over, which I'm more okay with that sort of thing.
right,
But the problem is that a lot of times those D20 dice systems don't even really portray that unless you have like a lot of things backing that concept. Or,
yeah.
like you're saying in a Pathfinder game where you're adding +20s to your rolls, stuff like
Well,
that.
and that's why like the D100 games like Call of Cthulhu are really cool because when you're good at something, you're like consistent at it. And if you're bad at something, you have a chance to get better at it because you failed. And
Hmm.
like that's a really cool thing. So if you're always mad where it's like, oh, I hate that I always do terrible at driving rolls or something, it's like cool. In Call of Cthulhu, if you want to get better at it, you just have to attempt to do it. And then there's a chance at the end of the session you can get better. And that's like a fun mechanic. And so you could arguably steal that for something like D&D. I don't know how, but you could.
Yeah, that actually reminds me a little bit of the way like Dragonbane does things. Like if you roll a nat 20 or a nat 1 on any skill within a session, you get a chance to like roll over that skill at the end of the session and see if you get better in it,
Yeah.
which I thought was like a really eloquent way to do that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, ultimately
But yeah,
what's funny is I think having tried all these RPGs, going back to 5th edition now because my party has decided that's what we're doing. Frank, we've tried too many other RPGs. Let's go back to our comfort food.
yeah.
I'm like, fine, we're gonna do some unique things though. I'm gonna change important parts of the rules, and maybe after enough playtesting, I might release those like homebrew rules. But like one of them is when death and dying happens, you don't just go unconscious or prone. It's like, no, I like games where you're now in a dying state, and so it's more of a risk reward. Do you keep pushing forward, but your character could die?
Mm.
Or do you fall back to heal yourself with the consequences of that still happening? So that's in there. I like we talked about with the dice modification, I'm changing how I do proficiency bonuses, which I've then learned there's a lot of skills and stuff that are tied to your proficiency bonus. So it's really
Oh yeah.
skills and attacks are now a separate bonus than your proficiency bonus, which might be used for certain feats. But I'm increasing the modifier on that because I like the idea of if you made your character to be sneaky, the barbarian should not outsneak the rogue, or the paladin because they rolled an at 20 should not be able to outsneak the rogue, or you know, insert whatever thing here. And so I'm
It-
modifying that. And so I think it's good to try all these different things because then you can find these small nuances that you like, go back to your favorite RPG and tweak them, and then it becomes your better favorite RPG.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and whether it's like you're taking the ideas of other systems, mining them and hacking them into your favorite game, or whether it's just something you sort of intrinsically learn as a game master, and then you sort of like impart that into the style of game you run. There's infinite ways that trying different systems can be beneficial to you. Or you just find that game that really works great for your group, and then look at that, you're all Vampire the Masquerade players, and
Yeah.
that's just what you end up doing going forward. Or you know
Yeah.
or you're travelers who get bit by vampires and become space vampires, I guess.
And then have to fight Greek gods or something.
And then have to fight Greek gods. We brought it back around.
Yeah.
Full circle. Well, you know what? I think we're coming up on our time here. It's almost been probably about 45 minutes here. We had an episode. I'll just say this: we had an episode we recorded, and I made a huge kerfuffle again. This is my second one of these. But I wanted to say thank you so much again for being on the show, Frank. This is Frank from What is Tabletop, if we didn't say that already.
Yeah.
Tell everybody at home what you've got going on the YouTubes lately.
Yeah, so this is Frank from What is Tabletop. We have a very busy week this week. We're celebrating our 1 year, so we got an Avatar one-shot coming out this Friday. We want to recommend everybody go watch that. We've been releasing some of the character art on our YouTube channel, so you can see the post there. We got a really cool artist. Genuinely, the art looks like someone from Avatar The Last Airbender drew it. It's incredible. So, at the very least, give the artist a round of applause, and then you can watch us kind of fumble our way through a very fun game system.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on here. And real quick at the end here, since you plugged them earlier, I will say go check out Indominate. They're having a Kickstarter as well that's coming up pretty soon. So
yeah, I think it's next
keep an
month.
eye out for that.
Yeah.
That game looks awesome.
Super fun.
Yeah. Well, cool. All right, everybody out there, remember to try different systems, because no matter what system you try, you'll always end up back at that same corridor with the Quantum Ogre. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Coming this June is Crit, community-run Infinite Tabletop, a free online community-led event where you can play different tabletop role-playing games with other members of the TTRPG community. Click here or go to tabletop.events for more information, and look out for my games, which I'll be running as well. Running through a dungeon, you come across a junction. You gotta go left or right. It doesn't matter what you choose, 'cause either way you lose. There's a Quantum Ogre just out of sight. And now it's coming to a head, the very thing you dread. You get ready for the coming fight. Your spells are waning fast, you hit them with your blast. It's the last flickering light. Quantum Ogre Cast, Quantum Ogre Cast, Quantum Ogre Cast, Quantum Ogre Cast.